Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Planning and Development Committee meeting, tonight being Monday the 8th of May 2017. With reference to the first item for this evening, recording and webcasting of meeting, this committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to be recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, that you are respectful of the other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations is the second item. I confirm that I have received none and the General Manager has received none either. We'll move now to political donations. The disclosure of political donations and requirements for the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 to the General Manager. Mr Zachnich.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This advice to the committee relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, Section 147, requiring a person submitting a planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the Council meeting room. In dealing with the development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council or council committee. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under the Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6 of that Act. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now we'll move to apologies. There are no apologies of committee members for this meeting. And noting that, we'll move on to item 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Mack.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that the committee recommends to Council that the minutes of the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday the 10th of April 2017 at 6 p.m. be adopted. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. There's no indication of any questions from councillors, so I'll put those minutes to the committee. All those in favour of those minutes, raise your hand. Anyone against? That motion is carried. Any matters arising from the minutes? There's no indication of any matters arising from the minutes, so we'll move to the next item, item number 6, reports from minutes and committees and working parties. There are none. Item 7, the draft Albury Creative Economy Strategy, reports for consideration. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends to Council that Council A receive and note the draft Albury Creative Economy Strategy 2017-21 and B place the draft Albury Creative Economy Strategy 2017-21 on public exhibition for a period of 28 days.
Thank you, as is on the board. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to second that.
Thank you. There's no indication of any questions, so Councillor Thurley, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's basically a first time we've had this strategy, and it's good to see. The only thing that I'd like to note is that it is talking about securing a 5% growth in the creative sector. It mentions a number of things such as Indigenous art, and it notes a population growth in this area of 1.7% over the last 12 months. One of the things that interested me most, of course, is that it says that Albury needs an iconic cultural festival, and we all know that many other places have these, and they're responsible for lots of visitation and lots of spending in communities. I don't know what that one should be. I don't have any strong suggestions to make. I do agree that expanding the right around the Murray is one very good idea. Perhaps it would be a good idea in the feedback we get to suggest to people that they might come up with ideas about what this cultural iconic festival might be. At least then we would hear from our community as to what it is they want, rather than, as we often are, being accused of telling them what they're going to get. So I strongly recommend this policy.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There's still no indication of any questions and no one wishing to speak against. So would you like to close debate, or are you happy for that motion?
Happy with it as it stands, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Noting the closing of debate, I'll now put that recommendation to the committee. All those in favour? Anyone against? That motion is carried. Officers' reports for noting there are none. Delegates' reports for noting there are none. Notice of matter urgent business. I'm not aware of any. There's no indication of any from councillors, and there are no confidential matters. So I'll now close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Where'd that little thing go? There it is. Welcome everyone to tonight's Engineering and Works Committee meeting. Just recording and webcasting of meetings. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. So, conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I've received none. There's none forthcoming. Mr Zachnich? No, thank you. Apologies, there's no, we're all present, no apologies. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that committee recommends to Council that the minutes of the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday the 10th of April 2017 at 6:25pm be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Glacken?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Any matters arising from the minutes? If none. Reports and minutes of committees and working parties. Councillor Thurley? Sorry, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm happy to move the both items for the minutes of the Traffic Committee and the minutes of the Zone Liaison together, if I may.
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Thurley?
Second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mackey had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair. I'd just like to ask, through Councillor Doxey, the appropriate member of staff, a question in relation to the minutes of the Local Traffic Safety Committee.
Right. There you go.
In matters without notice, MWN, given the prevalence of a few Thurgoona people in the gallery tonight, I thought it'd be interesting to ask the question of Mr Ferris, I think would be the respondent. There were a number of questions discussed about the traffic out at Thurgoona Drive and Queen Elizabeth and Elizabeth Mitchell Drive, and I see there's a response in the minutes. Mr Ferris, I just wondered what is happening with that particular issue, and if you could just apprise all of us how long that traffic study might be in the process of being completed.
Mr Ferris?
Through you, Mr Chair, the traffic model is in its final stages. We're looking for a response from RMS with regard to some of the outstanding issues, but We're anticipating that'll be completed this month. That will then give us some base information around current and future projections on traffic through some of those key intersections and interchanges. Will also give us some scenarios if changes are made, how we believe the traffic behaviour will change. As you're aware, we've commenced works last week on the roundabout at Thurgoona and travel stop Catherine Crescent intersection. And in our 4-year plan, we have roundabout improvements at Elizabeth Mitchell and Thurgoona, as well as roundabout improvements roundabout at the intersection of Kerr Road and Thurgoona as well. So armed with the information from the traffic model, we will then develop a transport strategy over 17-18.
You happy with that, Councillor Mack?
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Councillor Doxey, do you wish to open debate on the item?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd simply like, the minutes have been available for councillors to have a look at. And I'd like to say thank you to the members of those committees for their participation and support of council. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no questions or speakers against, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. There's no officers' reports for consideration. EWC 8, officers' reports for noting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I move the committee recommends to Council that the report on the status of the 2016-17 Works Program as at 31st of March be received and noted.
Thank you. Councillor Mack.
Happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that motion?
No, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Anyone else? I just want to ask a quick question from the Chair to the responsible officer. Has our major weather events this year impacted on our status report, and by how much? Thank you, Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Chair, as outlined in the report, the rainfall is well above average for the period, so we have had some challenges around that. Coupled with some of the bigger projects, we've had some issues around approvals from third parties, etc., to work through. So while the result to date is good, there's been some delays along the way that will cause some of these major projects to be works in progress on the 30th of June, as outlined in the report.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on future stuff for next financial year. I know in the past we've had some issues with our design people not being able to put out the work required for our... Are you confident with what's in the budget, the capital works, that our design people can be ready when these projects need to be done?
Through you, Mr Chair. Certainly we've looked at the resources in our design team of recent times, and also the support from the externals. A number of the hold-ups or the delays have actually been through specialist studies that need to be undertaken for approval. So they've been outside the control of our internal design team. Our internal projects are well advanced. It's more the projects that require that specialist expertise externally, and then are contracted out post that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Ferris. Does any no further questions or speakers against? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. There's no delegates' reports for noting, no notice of urgent business to my knowledge, no confidential matters, so I declare the meeting closed at 6:15 p.m. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to tonight's extraordinary council meeting for Monday the 8th of May 2017. Opening prayer and acknowledgement, if you'd like to all stand, thanks. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Thank you. Conflict of interest declarations. I've received one conflict of interest declaration from Mr. James Jenkins. It's a non-pecuniary, less than significant. Brief description is I'm the public officer of an organisation who has made a submission to the agenda item. Extraordinary Council Meeting CM5 Development Application 10.2016.34422.1 424 Lot Torrens, the subdivision 357 Kerr Road, Thurgoona. 8th of May 2017, and the action he intends to take is leave the room. There are no other conflict of interest declarations. Mr. Zachnich?
None received, Mr. Mayor.
None received. Councillor Starchby, have you had a question or have you accidentally pressed your button? Thank you. Okay, apologies. We have no apologies. Everyone's accounted for. Yep, Mr. Zachnich?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This advice is to the council meeting regarding the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Section 147 requires a person submitting planning applications and or submissions regarding the planning applications to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. Disclosure statement forms are available on the council's website or from the customer service centre. Forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters containing to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act Section 375 requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6 of the Act. Matters appearing in the Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes which require a planning decision to be made will be dealt with separately and immediately following the motion for the adoption of the Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes. In respect to these matters, motions for a planning decision put before council will be considered a division and recorded in accordance with Section 375A of the Local Government Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Officers' reports for noting. We have CM 5.1, the development application 10.2016.34422.1. 0424 Lot Torrens Title Subdivision 357 Kerr Road, Thurgoona, and let the records reflect that Mr. Jenkins has left the chamber. Thanks, Mr. Christie. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to move that Council receive and note the contents of this report and grant consent to the development application 10.2016 2016.34422.1 for 424 Torrens title lots at 357 Kerr Road, Thurgoona, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination shown as attachment 10 to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchby. Councillor Doxey?
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Stutchby, have a speaker against. Do you wish to open debate?
No, why don't we listen to the speaker against first?
Thank you. I have another speaker for, but happy to start with the speaker against, but I think I'll start with Councillor Thurley, speaker for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've made some extensive notes and I will refer to them as I speak. Tonight we've been asked to approve a subdivision, 424 lot subdivision, or with conditions, or refuse consent. And this project's been on the books now for well over a year, and it has generated thousands of pages of reports and the subject of numerous forums. And in the end, it comes down to the decision of 9 councillors, none of whom are, to my knowledge, planners. So in the period that this matter's been before council, there have been many changes to the original proposal. It could be that the original proposal was extremely poor, so that it was completely unacceptable, or it could be that the proponent has tried to address concerns expressed in forums and in questions relayed to them by council staff. On balance, I feel it's the latter. So does this mean that the proposal is now perfect or be accepted by all parties? Certainly not. The issues that have been raised with us are many, but the 3 that I pick, or 4, sorry, that I pick: flooding, lot sizes, open space and vegetation removal. Traffic has also been raised, but that's not a matter that's peculiar to this project. It's a matter that will affect Thurgoona and its development for many months and years to come. So let's talk firstly about the flooding issue. And this relates in particular to the proposal to use fill in the southwest corner of the project to raise that above the 1 in 100 flood level. And I note that our LEP cautions against this, but it is not prohibited. And in fact, this area is a low flood risk area, and it's much the same really as Eastern View Park or Eastern View Estate or Mungabarina Park. Yes, it has some effects and it will displace floodwaters to the environmental zone. The other issue that was raised quite late in the process was an issue raised by Mr Rod, which was about the construction of the road and the possibility that the retaining basin would be classified as a large dam. And this can't be done at the moment because the guidelines relating to large dams have still not been gazetted under the Act. However, I understand that a consent condition will be imposed that the road be designed to meet ANCOL standards as if it were a large dam. So to me, it covers that concern raised by Mr Rod. I must also say, of course, that DPI Water have issued general terms of agreement and they come also with conditions. The other issue, of course, lot size, and we are talking, generally speaking, about a guideline of having 15 dwellings per hectare, which I think equates to an average lot size of 615 square metres. And in this case, the average lot size is 659, ranging from 459 to almost 2,500 square metres. And we've had some discussions here about what that means and whether these lots are too small. But data from other parts of the city show that there is a demand for smaller blocks and that this development is consistent with what the market is asking for. Let's move on to open space. And it's true that the amount of open space in this development is less than 2%. However, that doesn't give the full picture. The developer has been required to set aside 3 drainage reserves of almost 9,000 square metres. And while they're drainage reserves, at some times of the year they will be open space. The other thing, it requires 4 drainage reserves for Sloane's froglet habitat. And I think there's a significant area that the developer has had to set aside for that purpose. He's also agreed for significant augmentation of the public open spaces, which is not normally required of a developer. And lastly, can I turn to the matter of tree removal? And it should be noted that the Threatened Species Conservation Strategy acknowledges that forward tree planting may be removed in the future. There are some hollow-bearing trees which were removed, and I agree that this is unfortunate. However, the developer has agreed to provide 10 nest boxes per large hollow tree removed, and with respect to vegetation removal, we'll replant trees in the ratio of 10 trees for every tree removed. I'm mindful of one other matter that we face each time we come to these determinations. It's not the most important thing that I face, but I consider the possibility of a decision being challenged in the Land and Environment Court is something I must take into account. When professional staff, referral agencies and others recommend approval with conditions, I need very strong evidence to vote against approval and expose council to what might be considerable costs in the Land and Environment Court. So in summary, I'll vote in favour of approving the development. There's only so much we can ask a developer to do and only so much the council can do. In many ways, the ultimate outcome of this development will be determined by the people who buy and build there. If they were to plant significant numbers of native plant species on their blocks, it would make a huge difference to the ambience and environment. Perhaps council could assist, as the WDC once did, by offering new residents a small number of native plants when they buy a block in the subdivision. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker against, Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I need to open by saying that I have no doubt that this area will be developed and that houses will be built there. It's residential land and it's in a growth corridor of AlburyCity. But we have the incredible opportunity as elected representatives of the community to impact today in what way this is going to happen. Surprisingly, Councillor Thurley, in speaking for this development, actually raised most of the issues against this development. This proposal was deferred at our last meeting at the end of April due to serious concerns about, amongst other things, flooding and open space. And since that deferral, the developer has refused to negotiate further to improve those issues. So given that those issues haven't been resolved, I'm now forced to speak against this development, though I was hoping that we would be able to negotiate these issues with the developer. Firstly, it makes no sense to me to fill in flood-prone land in a city like Albury that has such a significant amount of available space to build on. The open space provisions of about 3% are simply not good enough for future generations of kids in Albury, especially given that other developments we've recently approved, such as 47 Tabletop Road and 64 Tabletop Road, had about 20% of residential land left as public open space. I believe Hawke's Coat Estate on Riverina Highway has approximately 14% public open space. It's not good enough for us to accept 3%. And adding a couple of barbecues and shade cloths to the existing space shouldn't gloss over the fact that it's only 3%. Council actually has the admirable goal of reducing childhood obesity by 5% over 10 years, which I discovered in our Albury 2030 Community Strategic Plan. I don't understand how we're going to achieve that goal if we're approving a development with smaller than average lot sizes so that kids won't have back gardens to play in and they won't have public open space to go and kick a footy in. Additionally, there's the removal of over 1,200 native trees from the forward tree planting area in the southern part of this lot. Yes, there's an offset requirement for those to be planted elsewhere, but those are going to be planted in road reserves that have already been zoned for tree planting in the future. So if we look at what Albury's going to look like 100 or 200 years in the future, there's no additional treed area as a result of this tree removal. I think it's a great tragedy and it's unnecessary. The only argument I can see for permitting the infill, permitting the removal of the trees, is to allow this developer to build on every square metre of this development, which I just don't think is a good enough reason to let it go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have another speaker for, but I have a question. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. It's about open space, and the Speaker thus far for and against have given figures of about 3%. There was 2 point something or other and then 3%. Through to the most relevant member of staff, can I confirm that there is more than this that will not be built on than 3%? I think there's another figure that gives other land that is the fire area, or there's an area of space that can't be built on because of other restrictions, but it means then that there'll be a space larger than the 3% that won't be built on. Is that correct?
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the breakdown of additional space being provided that's been, except for roads and the road reserves, in addition to approximately 3% for open space, there's an additional 7.6% set aside for Sloane's froglet habitat, and another 0.6% that's specifically for stormwater drainage management. So it gives a total of around 11.2% of the total site. It's being dedicated to area that will be eventually turned over to council's responsibility, including that 3% for open space.
Thank you. So just to confirm, it's more than 2 point whatever it was that Councillor Thurley said. I can't remember, I'm sorry, David. And the 3%.
Public open space.
So it's 11.2% that will not be built on, and even the froglet space will be there as available as part of a community asset. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay. Councillor Stubbs, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to the open space, there's also, and this is a question for the most relevant member of staff, the initial size of the parcel of land that was sold by the Albury-Wodonga Development Corporation to the Department of Finance was much larger than the size of the current proposed subdivision, and the remainder of that land, I believe, has been zoned as environmental. Would it be true then that land could well be considered open space?
Mr. Keys.
Mr. Mayor, the intention of the original Thurgoona Threatened Species Strategy was to set aside particular areas of land for the protection and enhancement of the natural environment, for sustainability of threatened species and also the natural habitat. And that areas of that were also identified as being utilised for passive recreation, such as walking, and also general amenity for future residential development occur across the area. In this specific site, there was approximately 92 hectares that was excised off to create the environmental lands that completely surround this site, leaving a development site of about 117 hectares. So just under 50% of the site was potentially set aside for natural protection of the environment, and will be available and will provide future amenity for the local residents in this area, and will have additional pathways through there for the benefit of the future residents.
Councillor Stubbs, any further follow-up?
No, thank you, Mr. Keys.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Vanderven, you wish to speak for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note that the reason for the deferment was one, to get some clarification around the potential to not have to fill in the flood-prone land on the southwest corner of the block, but the other one was to get head around 980 odd pages of reports. So it was important to make sure that happened. As indicated at the meeting on April the 24th, where this was deferred, I indicated during the debate that I was happy with all of the, if you like, the compromises that were made between the council staff and the developer as far as the issues around Sloane's froglet and the public open space and the amenities that were being put in those public open spaces. I did indicate that it would have been nice to have some land set aside for perhaps a shopping centre or childcare centre, but on subsequent questioning of council staff, I ascertained that there's no reason why somebody that wants to perhaps provide that facility in the future development cannot buy a block of land to do those, to create those business opportunities in that whole, what will eventually be about 1,150 lot development. So you're looking at between 3,500 and 4,000 people living in that precinct, and I would have thought that that might provide enough incentive for somebody to start a small business in that area. So I was happy with that. And on balance, I think Councillor Thurley has put all of the cogent issues, as far as I'm concerned, covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, so I'm not going to repeat. But I think we've set aside, or we've anticipated with our Thurgoona Willinga strategy that we're having something like 40,000 people out there by the year 2050. We need to get on and do that if that's what we want to try and achieve by that time. And yeah, I'm not one of these people that thinks that we should have development at any cost, and I think that this development, with the amount of land set aside for environmental, for public open space, for Sloane's Froglet, is it's a good result for the community, and I think this development application deserves support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. There are no speakers against. So I'll have a speaker for. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This area has long been identified as a growth area for Albury. I don't agree with one of the previous speakers, my fellow councillor, who said that there is plenty of land for development in Albury. Within the confines of AlburyCity, we have a very relatively compressed area that has been identified for future development. There are no other areas within the city that would not throw up equal or worse objections on environmental and on social grounds. People need places to live. People need work building these houses well into the future for the next 20 and 30 years. This development has its challenges, but on balance, I'm prepared to support it. The amount of land that is under the 1 in 100 flood level is much less than was done when Eastern View Estate was developed. In there was something like 100 lots that were filled in to bring them up above the 1 in 100 level. This development will require something like 60. It follows fairly reasonably that this development is only 60% of the impact, or the potential impact, of Eastern View, if that's the correct name of the estate, Eastern View Estate, where the mayor lives anyway, out that way. Thanks. That's all right. So I don't see that any development or proposed development, this is my third term on council over 20 years, in the course of 20 years, each time there is a development, a significant development, and this is probably the biggest development we will approve or not approve certainly in the term of this council, these issues have to be confronted. Fundamentally, the city must grow. People need housing, affordable housing, and people need jobs building that housing. That is an important consideration, as is the environment, as are social issues. But this development, on balance, weighs in the positive, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. We have no further speakers for or against, and no questions. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close debate on this item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to close debate. There's a number of people in the gallery, many of whom are probably here for this particular item, and this DA has attracted a lot of attention, and there's been a number of public meetings and forums, and it now comes up for its second discussion at a council meeting. I have received numerous reports from council staff members on this development, and I've read them all. I also received numerous submissions from members of the public, and it's those that I want to address now in closing this debate. In no particular order, I've just written down some dot points tonight. Firstly, there was some concern that this site was originally planned to be a lake. I'm not aware of the veracity of that, but my feeling would be that here in Albury with Lake Hume, the Murray River, Mungabarina Reserve, Horseshoe Lagoon, Waterworks, we've probably got enough lakes. I don't think there's a genuine need for Lake Thurgoona. That's my personal opinion on that. Footpaths and connectivity. This is a slightly difficult piece of land in that it funnels down in a southwesterly direction to the confluence of two creeks. At present, the way in will be a road coming in from the west from Tabletop Road. Ultimately, there'll be another road coming in from the northeast, Kerr Road. The road connecting the estate with Tabletop Road will have a footpath that will connect with other footpaths in the region, which is really good. Footpath and shared cycleway. I'd love to see something from the southwest connecting with Thurgoona Park Drive across the confluence of the creeks. This is probably an engineering problem, and it could be expensive, but that will be nice to look at in the future. Trees. There's going to be a number of forward planting trees removed and also some remnant trees out in the paddock. I'm more concerned about the remnant trees than the forward planting trees. Forward planting is exactly what it is, forward planting. They're going to be replaced in a 1:10 ratio. The remnant trees in the paddocks, some of which may be hollow bearing, I'd love to see them preserved, but I'm advised that firstly, if you isolate a remnant tree in a block, maintenance is difficult. There's the potential danger of falling branches, and furthermore, they don't contribute in particular to habitat for species in the area because they're surrounded by houses and lights and noise. So as much as I'd like to see remnant trees in the middle of the paddock retained, it's probably not practical. Size of blocks, well, we've already heard about the size of blocks. I think in general they're reasonable. We need to provide affordable housing. We also have some bigger blocks in the reservation, and I think the size of blocks is really not a particular issue. Flooding has been a strong issue with the submissions. Many submissions regarding the southeast corner and the confluence of the two creeks and the floodplain being filled in. And as you've heard, it's standard practice and acceptable engineering to do that. So although I accept that it's an issue in the public conscience, I think in reality it's succeeded in Eastern View Estate and Mungabarina Reserve, and there's no reason why it wouldn't succeed here. Green space, there's more than you think. If you heard the answer to Mr. Key's question, it's not far under 50%, not 2 or 3%. You just may need to walk a little bit further to access it. Threatened species, this DA I think goes above and beyond in regards to its treatment of the Sloane's froglet. That is perhaps offset by not really addressing the squirrel, the tree glider, and in time, I think with growth of trees and the presence of plenty of environmental land around the subdivision, I think that animal will find its spot. I received quite a few verbal and written submissions on the name of the subdivision. At the moment, it's called Thurgoona Park North, which is the name that it was given by the Albury Development Corporation. Residents of Thurgoona Park compare and contrast their subdivision with this one and note that their blocks are much bigger and there's more space and it's a different feel. Well, I don't think in the final analysis that this subdivision will be named Thurgoona Park North. I don't know what it will be named, but I think that that's a reasonable comment for those residents to make. Traffic is difficult. Thurgoona is already a little congested, as is South Albury and Central Albury and North Albury and East Albury and West Albury. Traffic is an issue for this city. The subdivision is currently 424 lots, increasing to over 1,000, but they're not all going to be built tomorrow or next week or next month. It could take 10 or 20 years for the development to be completed, and one would hope that the road network would be a bit better then than it is now. As for the matter of the dam, in my view, that submission from Mr. Rod was interesting in its timing and content. I think that the questions that was asked of that submission have been largely answered by staff. Councillor Conn, at the moment, is the only objector to the DA. She made a few points. The DA wasn't deferred because of serious concerns over what's in the DA. The DA was deferred to give us a bit more time to read everything and also have another workshop and hear some more information from it. There have been some concerns about this DA, but none of them are serious. We just needed a bit more time. The developer also needs an answer in a reasonable amount of time, which is why this extraordinary meeting was called, amongst other reasons. Councillor Conn was worried about the filling in of the floodplain, as were many of the submissions against the DA. And one thing that's not been mentioned tonight is that the infrastructure for this particular DA comes in from the southwest, and the southwest, where the floodplain is going to be filled in, is where sewage and water, etc., is going to come in, and it's an integral part of the development, and I think that it needs to go ahead. And so I'll stop there because you're all bored, but that's my thoughts on this. It's in essence a good DA with a few issues that have been more or less resolved. I'm quite in favour of it and will vote for it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. On that note, I will put the motion and leave your hands raised for a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Doxy, Cameron, Mack, King, Glacken, Thurley and Vanderven. And those against? Councillor Conn. Thank you, Councillor. The motion is passed, and that concludes our extraordinary meeting at 6:49.